Still More Stories from Grandma's Attic by Arleta Richardson. Illustrated by Dora. Chapter 13. The Perfect Party. "We sure do have a nice teacher this year," I said to Grandma shortly after school had started in the fall. "I thought Mrs. Bingham was the best last year, but Mrs. Dorman is just as good." "I'm glad," Grandma replied. "School is always so much nicer when you like your teacher. I never had the experience of changing teachers every year. Ours usually stayed 5 or 6 years or more." "Was Miss Gibson your favorite one?" I asked. "You've told me a lot of stories about her." "Yes, I think she probably was. She certainly had a lot of patience to put up with all the foolishness we got into. We always looked for things to take to her, or something to surprise her with, but we were pretty limited in our offerings. There wasn't money to buy things, so we had to use our imaginations." The second year Miss Gibson was our teacher, Sarah Jane and I were in the third reader. The school wasn't large that year, only about 15 students, but we all loved Miss Gibson. One day the sixth reader class was reciting at the front of the room. As usual, Sarah Jane and I listened in. "Shakespeare was born in 1564, Miss Gibson told them. "There's some argument about the day. Some people say April 23rd and some say April 26th. I would like to think it's April 23rd because that's the day I was born. I'd like to share a birthday with a famous person, but it's probably April 26th. At recess time, Sarah Jane and I discussed what we had overheard. "Now that we know the date, we should plan a big birthday party for Miss Gibson," I suggested. "Don't you think that would be fun?" "Oh, yes," Sarah Jane agreed. "I won't forget her birthday either because Caleb's is April 26th. Maybe he shares a birthday with Shakespeare. It depends on who's right about the date." "I think we should let Miss Gibson have it." Sarah Jane nodded. "I think so too. Caleb wouldn't care if Shakespeare had been born right on our own farm, let alone on his birthday." "Where shall we have the party?" "If we're going to invite a lot of people, we'd better have it here. There are 15 of us in school. We'll all bring our families, so that will be a big crowd." "That's a good idea," Sarah Jane said. "We can decorate the room with streamers and all the spring flowers we can find. And we'll make a big banner that says, 'Happy Birthday, Miss Gibson.' Won't she be surprised?" "She will if we can keep the little kids from telling her. We'll have to threaten them with a thump on the head if they tell." "We can't do that," I argued. "I think they'll keep the secret when we let them know how important it is. The first time Miss Gibson is out of the room, we'll announce it." Our chance came that afternoon. We were studying quietly when Miss Gibson stood up. "Children, I've just found that I've left some of your papers at home. While you're working, I'll go back and get them. I shouldn't be more than a few minutes, so you are on your honor." As soon as the door closed, and we were sure Miss Gibson was out of hearing, Sarah Jane jumped to her feet. "Listen, everyone, we want to have a surprise party here at school for Miss Gibson on her birthday. If someone in each family bakes a cake, we should have plenty. I think my folks and Mabel's will make the ice cream. It will be at 7 o'clock in the evening on April 23rd. Don't forget the date, and whatever you do, don't let Miss Gibson know about it." Sarah Jane fixed her eyes on the front row of beginners. "It's a secret. Do you promise you won't tell?" They nodded solemnly. "All right. We'll talk later about decorating the room. Remember, not a word." She sat back down. By the time Miss Gibson returned, everyone was working quietly. On the way home after school, Sarah Jane and I continued our plans. "I'm not worried about the cake and ice cream, but what are we going to give her?" I asked. "I don't have any money to get anything. Do you?" Sarah Jane shook her head. "I never have any money. Do you suppose we should ask our folks for some?" "I don't think so. These should be our gifts to Miss Gibson. Besides," I added, "Pa doesn't have any money for things like presents. I'm sure we can think of something to make her." That night at supper I brought up the subject. "It's going to be a wonderful party," I told Ma and Pa. "Miss Gibson will be so pleased, and it's really going to be a surprise. But I have to decide on a present. What do you think I could do, Ma?" "I know what I'm going to do," Roy put in. "I'll give her the bookends I'm carving." "That will make a nice gift," Ma said. "Mabel, how would you like to make a pretty apron? I'll cut it out for you if you want to stitch it." "Oh, yes, Ma, she'll like that." Do you think I can get it done in 2 weeks? I'm sure you can if you work on it after school every day. We'll start this evening. How about you, Reuben? Do you have any idea for a gift?
Do you remember the picture of the schoolhouse I drew? Do you think that would be all right? I think that would be just the thing, Pa said. Get it out and I'll help you frame it. On the way to school the following morning, Sarah Jane and I compared notes.
The apron is all ready to start sewing on, I said. I'll begin as soon as I get home. What are you going to make? I wanted to make a sampler for her, but Ma thinks that will take too long. I can't think of anything else to do. Why don't you hemstitch some towels? They would go nicely with the apron. I don't know how to hemstitch, Sarah Jane exclaimed. If I learn on Miss Gibson's towels, it wouldn't be a very pretty present. Just put in a plain hem, then. You already know how to embroider. You could put our initials on them. That sounds good. Let's hurry home as soon as we can and get started. For the next week, I worked every afternoon on the apron. Some days, Sarah Jane brought her towels over and we talked as we sat on the porch steps sewing. This is the one thing we've planned that isn't going to go wrong, she declared. I can't think of a thing we've left out, can you? Not a thing, I said. And for once, I haven't even had to take my sewing out. This time, everything is going to be perfect. Would you girls like some cookies? Ma called through the screen door. I'm taking fresh ones from the oven. Oh, yes, Ma. I'll come right in and get them. I picked up the apron to put it aside, but it wouldn't move. It was sewn to my pinafore. Sarah Jane looked at it, and then she burst out laughing. I'm sure I don't know what's funny, I said crossly. Would you want me to laugh if you did that? I'm sorry, Mabel, but you just finished saying that you hadn't had to take any stitches out yet. And I said that nothing was going to go wrong. I guess we were both mistaken, weren't we? Ma appeared at the doorway to see what had happened. I wouldn't say that it would be safe for either one of you to boast about anything being perfect, she commented. I've seen things that couldn't possibly go wrong fall apart when you two get mixed up in them. She pointed to the apron on my lap. If taking out a little sewing is the worst that happens, you won't have to worry. It had better be the worst, I grumbled. I don't have the time to be doing things over. It was a good thing that we couldn't see into the future. The Bible is right when it says that each day's troubles are enough for that day. We don't need to know that more will follow. Everything went well until April 23rd, the day of the party. If Miss Gibson noticed that her class seemed more restless that day, she didn't mention it. But for most of us, it was the longest day of the year. At closing time, Reuben raised his hand. A couple of us would like to stay and work a little longer, Miss Gibson. I'll be sure to lock up if it's all right. Why, that's fine, boys, she replied. I'm glad to see you're so interested in your studies. I'll be happy to stay a while, too, if you'd like. We held our breath. Oh, no, thank you, Miss Gibson. We'll get along just fine, Reuben answered her. You can go right along home. Fortunately, she agreed. When school was dismissed, most of us left the yard as she did, but when she was out of sight, we returned quickly. We'll put 2 tables together at the front to hold the presents, Reuben directed. The cakes can go on the desks by the wall. Now let's hurry and put the streamers around. Miss Gibson's desk was chosen as the ideal place for the happy birthday banner. Sarah Jane and I set to work at once to print it. Be sure you don't spell something wrong, Mabel, Roy called. You've got 4 whole words to put on there. Ignore him, I said to Sarah Jane. He thinks he's so bright. He'd like you to believe that he'd never made a mistake in his life. When we finished, Reuben locked the door and we hurried home to get ready for the party. Try to get your folks to leave a little bit early. Then we can be there to welcome everyone. I assured her that we would be there by 7:15, and we were. By 7 o'clock, the others began to arrive. We hurried about, placing cakes and gifts in their proper places. Soon the room began to fill up. Whenever the door opened, we looked expectantly toward it, but Miss Gibson did not appear. Do you suppose we should go and get her? Sarah Jane asked me. Or at least go over and see when she's coming? I agreed that we should, and we ran across the school ground to the minister's home, where Miss Gibson lived. But she's not here, the minister's wife told us when we inquired about Miss Gibson. Her parents came and took her into town for dinner. Everyone is here for her birthday party, I cried. Mabel, Sarah Jane said, did you tell her about the party? We looked at each other in silence. You didn't tell her either, I said. Nobody told her. What do we do now? I'll tell her, offered Mrs. Brooke. As soon as she gets home, I'll send her right over there. Why don't you just go ahead with your party? There was nothing else to do. Slowly, we went back to the school. You'd think we'd learn, wouldn't you? Sarah Jane said sadly. We can't even have a party that goes right. What are we going to tell them? We'll just have to say that everyone kept the secret so well that Miss Gibson still doesn't know it. I hope she gets back early. Happily, Miss Gibson and her parents arrived at 8 o'clock. The party was a huge success, and she was greatly pleased with her gifts. When she thanked us, she said, "It isn't often that a surprise party is a surprise to the people who give it."
No, Pa agreed. Not unless it's Sarah Jane and Mabel who are giving it. Then anything can happen.
End of chapter 13.